Madam Ambassador.
The nomination is confirmed.
As Callista Gingrich prepares to head to Rome, we delve into the role played by the U.S. ambassador. Protecting conscience rights. The Department of Justice settles dozens of cases challenging the Obamacare contraceptive mandate. Liberating Raqqa. Major advances on ISIS's self-declared seat of power. And honoring the Vincentians, celebrating the legacy of St. Vincent de Paul 400 years later. We'll have a report from Rome. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 17th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Callista Gingrich will soon be sworn in as the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. This comes after a lengthy Senate confirmation. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us what's next for her and her husband, former Speaker Newt Gingrich. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The former Speaker tells News Nightly his wife will likely move to Rome in early November. He says she wants to be fully briefed by embassy staff before doing any interviews. President Trump nominated her way back in May, and if you can believe it, 5 months later, she finally wins approval.
On this nomination, the yeas are 70, the nays are 23. The nomination is confirmed.
With that, the Senate confirms Callista Gingrich as U.S. ambassador to the Holy See.
She'll articulate the issues. I think she'll be a good listener. I think she'll be a good representative for Americans as they're visiting the Vatican.
Oklahoma Republican James Lankford voted yes, as did West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin.
I give the benefit of the doubt to the administration.
Did you find her to be qualified?
Yes. Good Catholic.
But 23 Democrats voted against her. And some Catholics complain, criticizing her earlier affair with Speaker Newt Gingrich. Now married, they work together, even producing a documentary on Pope John Paul II.
Throughout the 2,000-year history of the papacy, only 2 popes served longer than John Paul II.
Callista Gingrich also sings in the choir at America's largest Catholic church, D.C.'s National Shrine. Soon, she'll be a main link between President Trump and Pope Francis.
I used to say I deal in moral diplomacy.
Former Vatican ambassador Jim Nicholson tells me so much of Gingrich's work will be behind the scenes. He briefed Pope John Paul II in the aftermath of 9/11.
And he looked at me and he said, Ambassador Nicholson, we have to stop these people who are killing in the name of God.
Ambassador Nicholson expects Gingrich to work with the Vatican on critical issues like human trafficking, hunger relief, and religious freedom.
She will be right in the middle of many of those important discussions, believe me.
An around-the-clock job in the Eternal City.
My wife would say that you were either hosting or being hosted 7 nights a week.
And Newt Gingrich tells News Nightly he won't be speaking about his wife's job. That was one of the lessons he learned at spouse training. He says his wife is the central figure, so Callista doesn't want any confusion. Lauren?
How can Ambassador Gingrich further the partnership between the U.S. and the Vatican?
Well, Nicholson mentioned it really is great working with the Vatican. He said, think about it, they're across the world, missionaries, priests, nuns, pretty much everywhere. They can use U.S. aid through the church to really get it to people in need.
Correspondent Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. The Department of Justice settles more than 70 lawsuits, including one by the Archdiocese of Washington, challenging the controversial HHS contraceptive mandate. The plaintiffs will not be forced to provide coverage for contraception. You can read more about the settlements, including a statement from Washington Cardinal Donald Wuerl at CatholicNewsAgency.com. President Donald Trump is expressing support for an agreement struck by 2 leading lawmakers to extend federal payments to health insurers. Republican Senator Lamar Alexander and Democrat Patty Murray plan to extend the federal payments blocked by the president. The compromise is still likely to face opposition in Congress. And in the wake of the president's executive order on health care, U.S. bishops are speaking out. In a statement, Bishop Frank Duane says this is of grave concern. The Affordable Care Act is by no means perfect, but as leaders attempt to address impending challenges to insurance market stability and affordability, they must not use people's health care as leverage or as a bargaining chip. A judge in Hawaii blocks the latest version of President Trump's travel ban. It was set to take effect at midnight. The Trump administration's restrictions affect citizens of 7 countries, plus some Venezuelan government officials. And President Trump says Greece has gone through a lot, but is doing a terrific job of coming back. His remarks come as he hosts Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras. But in addition to a severe financial crisis, Greece is in the midst of a culture war. A new law is making it easier for people to officially change their gender. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. In the past, President Trump has been critical of Greece and how it handled its financial crisis. Greece has relied on international bailouts since 2010 to address its economic recession. But in the Rose Garden today, the president praised Greece and promised the U.S. will stand with the country.
Once it gets over this tremendous financial hurdle that it's in the process of working out, we think that there'll be great stability in Greece, and militarily and in every way we look at it as very important and very important to the United States.
During the 2016 election, Prime Minister Tsipras warned that Trump represented an evil set of ideas. Today he was asked if he still thinks of the president as evil, and Tsipras joked that there was not a moment today where he felt threatened at any time. President Trump described American-Greek relations as very productive.
I also commend Greece for being one of the few NATO countries currently spending at least 2% of GDP on defense. My administration has also informed Congress of a potential sale to Greece to upgrade its F-16 aircraft. This agreement to strengthen the Hellenic Air Force is worth up to $2.4 billion and would generate thousands of American jobs.
A White House official also tells me the leaders discussed the refugee crisis in Greece and how it should be a priority for Europe and the U.S. Greece has been a gateway into Europe for hundreds of thousands of refugees from the Middle East who are fleeing war and poverty. The Trump administration is lowering the number of refugees to 45,000. That's down from about 85,000 under President Obama in 2016. Lauren.
I understand, as we mentioned earlier, that Orthodox priests are ringing their church bells at noon every day this week in protest of a new gender law. What is happening?
That's right. They're protesting a new law allowing Greeks over the age of 15 to easily change their gender on official documents. Before, they had to prove they had undergone sex change surgery and psychiatric evaluation before it could be made official. One Greek Orthodox bishop has ordered priests in his diocese to ring their church bells every day this week at noon to protest that new law. Lauren.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. President Trump's pick for drug czar withdraws his name from consideration. Democrats criticized Republican Representative Tom Marino for a bill that cuts restrictions on opioids.
Confirming Representative Marino as our nation's drug czar is like putting the wolf in charge of the hen house.
And I find it unconscionable that critics of the bill and of Representative Marino would flat out ignore the very real patient concerns that motivated this bill.
Republican Senator Orrin Hatch defends Marino. So does President Trump, who called him a fine man and a great congressman. The Islamic State appears on the verge of collapse. U.S.-backed forces in Syria say they have captured Raqqa, once the seat of power for ISIS. This is after a grueling 4-month battle. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. U.S.-led coalition forces say about 90% of Raqqa has been cleared of ISIS militants. Pockets of the city are still under their control, but a major military victory against the Islamic extremists have Syrians celebrating tonight. Cheers on the streets of Raqqa after a senior Syrian commander announces the liberation of the city. Leading the effort on the ground is the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. They have been fighting ISIS since the terror group took over a large part of eastern Syria in 2014. The forces have been supported by tens of thousands of U.S.-led airstrikes. I asked coalition spokesman Colonel Ryan Dillon, who joined us from Baghdad via satellite, about the U.S. partnership with the Syrian forces. What it's been like to work with them.
They have shown, despite not being a military that is a traditional military with armor and like the Iraqi security forces, the one thing that they have been able to show is very good leadership, and they have also been able to show that they are willing and committed to this fight.
And Colonel Dillon says that fight is far from over. Syrian forces are still clearing landmines and booby traps scattered throughout the city. Drone video shows the extent of the damage. One lingering image, the Naim roundabout, the square where ISIS carried out public executions. President Trump vows to stand with our coalition partners and allies in the region to root out ISIS, which he called evil. The president making reference to ISIS targeting religious minorities over the last 3 years.
And they've ruthlessly slaughtered innocent Christians, along with the vicious killing of innocent Muslims and other religious minorities. And we've made their lives very, very difficult.
The U.S. military says even after Raqqa is fully liberated, more fighting will be required to achieve the full military defeat of ISIS. Colonel Dillon says there are still about 100 fighters in Raqqa and an estimated 6,500 militants in Syria and Iraq combined. Lauren?
Wyatt, the most striking piece of that video you showed was that circle where they carried out public executions. Horrific. Have Christians experienced that? What other things are they talking about?
Yes, Lauren. So ISIS promised anyone living under their rule justice, equality, even an Islamic utopia. But over the years, the militants systematically targeted Christians and Yazidis, kidnapping women and girls as sex slaves. They beheaded workers and journalists, and they destroyed many archaeological sites in the area, including historic churches. Many Christians have fled the Middle East over all this in the last few years, and many may never return as a result. Lauren.
And that's happening not just in Syria, but in Iraq. Thank you so much, correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Pentagon. Celebrations on the streets of Kirkuk, Iraq, after government forces claimed the city and nearby oil fields from Kurdish troops. The city of more than 1 million is home to Arabs, Kurds, Sunni and Shiite Muslims, and Christians. Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte visits the southern city of Marawi as his troops push out Islamic terrorists.
I hereby declare Marawi City liberated from the terrorist influence.
Duterte visited the battle-scarred city as the military continued to gain control of the last pocket controlled by ISIS. The threat of the militants who have occupied the city for 5 months is now over. Thousands more Rohingya Muslims are continuing to flee violence and persecution in Myanmar and crossing into Bangladesh. More than 500,000 others are already living in overcrowded camps in that nation. Pope Francis will visit the country next month. Spain's top court officially rules that Catalonia's independence referendum was illegal. It comes as protesters gather for demonstrations in Barcelona to demand the release of 2 leaders of Catalonia's pro-independence movement who were jailed. The northeast region of Spain voted earlier this month for independence. An Italian priest working in Nigeria has been kidnapped. Father Maurizio Paulu has been a missionary in Nigeria for 3 years. It is believed he was taken by armed men in the southern city of Benin. The Vatican says Pope Francis is aware of the kidnapping and is praying for the priest. It has been 400 years since St. Vincent de Paul founded his religious congregation in France to evangelize the poor and form priests. The community, with more than 3,000 priests and brothers in 86 countries, is marking the milestone. Many key players celebrated at the Vatican with Pope Francis this past weekend, including officials from St. John's University based in Queens, New York. The school was founded in 1870 by Vincentians. EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley has more from Rome.
Although we're thousands of miles away from New York, The principles taught to students at St. John's University are the same the world over, Dr. Bobby Gempesaw tells me as he visits the Rome campus.
All our students must take theology and philosophy to graduate. So they get, regardless of their faith, get the same education, all of them based on those courses that we offer.
Half of the student body of America's second largest Catholic university are non-Catholics, but Dr. Gempesaw says all students follow the Vincentian principle of helping the poor.
More than 90% of our students before they graduate participate in academic service learning. What that means is that our students really go out into the city, for example, to serve those most in need, which is the primary mission of the Vincentians.
For visiting students like Julia Schwan from Brazil, who's spending a semester at St. John's Rome campus, that translates into making typical Italian food for the homeless in St. Peter's Square.
Here in the Rome campus, we have the Panini Run, where we make sandwiches and we go to the Vatican to distribute sandwiches at night for people who are there.
Julia says she speaks for most students when she says that the 400th anniversary of the Vincentians fills her with pride.
It makes us see that we are part of something bigger, very, very big. I mean, for 100 years. And to see that we're still following his steps, St. Vincent de Paul, and doing things that he taught us, I think it's pretty amazing.
And St. John's University is continuing St. Vincent de Paul's legacy and is proud to have campuses not just in the U.S. and Italy, but in France and Spain, too. Another source of great pride for the university is the large number of students that it has that are on the poverty line. Last year, St. John's provided more than $230 million in financial aid. Juliet Lindley in Rome, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, a call to action.
Your help is still needed.
The First Lady asks for help following the recent hurricane. And an honor for Senator John McCain provokes a warning.
For the sake of some half-baked, spurious nationalism.
The President and I have witnessed firsthand the compassion and commitment of Americans.
First Lady Melania Trump issues a public service announcement asking Americans to help the survivors of Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. The video was released by the White House today in coordination with FEMA. Toxic water, torrential rain, treacherous roads, and mudslides. Puerto Ricans are facing a humanitarian crisis and are desperate for help. Nearly 2 weeks after President Trump visited Puerto Rico, the official death toll has tripled to at least 48. Most of the island is still without power. Roads are littered with debris. The Navy's USS Comfort is sailing near the coast of Puerto Rico to provide medical assistance. In a pointed speech on Monday, Senator John McCain cautioned the United States against turning toward half-baked, spurious nationalism.
To fear the world we have organized and led the 3/4 of a century, to abandon the ideals we have advanced around the globe, is as unpatriotic as an attachment to any other tired dogma of the past that Americans consigned to the ash heap of history.
The Republican from Arizona made the comments shortly after receiving the Liberty Medal by the National Constitutional Center in Philadelphia. Former Vice President Joe Biden was on hand to bestow the medal to his friend, John McCain. Joining us now to discuss it, Vince Coglianese, editorial director at the Daily Caller, host of Mornings on the Mall on WMAL Radio right here in Washington. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
Donald Trump responded to Senator McCain today by saying, people have to be careful because at some point I fight back. Is this a low blow?
Well, I think the president is naturally sensitive. He's always sensitive to these things. And I think that's his way of saying that he is keeping his powder dry. Most people don't say that out loud, but in this case, he's saying, look, I'm holding back. And by the way, he made those comments to my colleague, Chris Plant, this morning. And as I watched him kind of say that this morning, I thought to myself, wow, that's going to catch fire. Because people care sincerely about John McCain. They think he's an honest broker. They may not always agree with him, but he does always speak his mind. And I think that's what we saw last night as he came out against the president.
Brain cancer.
Yes.
So I think that there is also a sympathy vote that goes along with anything
Right.
with having to do with John McCain right now. Senator McCain has never held back, as you said, and he and President Trump have clashed a lot before this. Is this hurting the president and the GOP cause to have this titan duking it out with the president?
Well, I don't think it's giving them an assist in terms of getting them to work together. What I will say is we saw Senator Bob Corker recently, crack a joke about how the president needed a daycare center, all of these things. At their core, these senators need to remember they need to pursue a legislative agenda that's good for their constituents. If they're fighting with the president, that's one thing. But at the end of the day here, if they're going to get mad at him for not being an adult, they need to show that they are. And so even if they disagree with the president's behavior, so long as they agree with his agenda, they need to come to the table and need to vote for that agenda. And that includes tax reform, which they're talking about this week.
Well, yesterday was this Republican love fest, basically between Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, talking about sharing the same agenda. You are in Washington, a Washingtonian. You cover this stuff. Is it true?
I think that they're putting on a very happy face, I think. And those two guys, I think they both came with separate agendas. One, Mitch McConnell wanted assurances that all of the people calling for his job, calling for his head, that the president wasn't one of them right away. I think what the president wanted was he wanted to be convinced that Mitch McConnell is going to pursue his agenda specifically on tax reform. They've had a lot of big tests here legislatively. So far, not much has succeeded, save Neil Gorsuch.
Tax reform, top of the GOP agenda. You interviewed Vice President Mike Pence today. He talked about the tax cut helping the middle class. He called himself middle class. Do you think that Americans are going to buy that? Did you feel that that was real?
Well, I think most times when you see a politician consider themselves middle class, you reflexively say, there's no way. All of you politicians get rich off of this job somehow. I don't even know how it is, but everybody gets rich doing it. Yeah, look, he's basically saying, look, I identify with the middle class. He said, I shop at Joseph A. Bank, I have student loans, I have these concepts of what it means to be middle class. And the important point here is that the President of the United States is insisting that this tax reform will be middle class relief. I was asking him questions about it because I know that some people are concerned there will be some middle class tax hikes. I do think that the noises we've been hearing from the White House and specifically the President over the past few days suggest he's going out of his way to make sure that they negotiate something that guarantees tax cuts for the middle class.
For the middle class. Thank you so much. Vince Colonnese, editorial director at the Daily Caller, host of Mornings on the Mall on WMAL Radio. Thank you. Up next, the rise of nationalism in Europe. We discuss political changes and lighting up the night skies using a church. Today is the feast of St. Ignatius of Antioch. Born in Syria in the 1st century, he converted to Christianity and became a bishop. Ignatius is a martyr, killed for his faith, and was the first person to use the term Catholic to describe the church. Right-wing parties chalked up more victories in Europe over the weekend. This put further pressure on mainstream conservatives to take a harder line on immigration. In Austria, a 31-year-old centrist won over 30% of the vote and is poised to become Austria's next prime minister. He's expected to join with the country's far-right political party. After losing seats in last month's elections, German Chancellor Angela Merkel recently agreed to limit the number of immigrants Germany takes in each year. And this issue has been at the forefront of European politics since 2015. The influx of more than 2 million migrants fueling voters' fears of unrestricted immigration. Joining me now is Robert Rauhut, Communications Director for EWTN Germany. You're based in Cologne. Welcome to the United States. Welcome to the studio.
Hello, nice to be with you.
Let's talk about immigration. It seems to be a very big issue, as I just mentioned, in much of Europe. What's the situation in Germany? What do people want in Germany?
The country is divided on this issue, so people in Eastern Germany look at it a bit differently from people in the West or South.
How so?
They are more critical in the East than in the West regarding immigrants. They take a more critical and distant stance on them, whereas in the west and in the southern part of the country, people are more open and quite receptive. So when you go down on the ground into the parishes, you'll find people who are very open-hearted and are prepared to receive them, to help them. For instance, an example I can give you is one parish I know. It's a place where they got refugees and they formed classes to start teaching the children, especially the children, the German language. So you see there is quite an open heart to receive them.
But politically, it's a real hot potato, as it is here. And in the Czech Republic, Andrej Babiš is running for prime minister. He's a billionaire who said the country should be run like a business. I wonder where else I'm hearing that. Talks about draining the swamp, and he wants to keep out Muslims. He's been very critical of programs where European Union countries share costs, particularly with refugees and asylum seekers. So is this another case of nationalism rising in Europe?
I think one has to distinguish and phrase the wording very carefully. I think it's more a question of identity, of European identity, how Europe is going to be in the future. And when you take Central European countries, especially, they are more aware of their national identity, of their heritage and of their history. And as they were used to have a strong country from the east, Moscow and the Soviet Union, which was putting pressure on them, so they were not very independent. So some of them perceive the same thing with the European Union and Brussels nowadays. So it's much more about identity than a nationalism which is comparable to the classical nationalism we have experienced in the 19th and 20th century. And these movements, when we look at the elections in the Netherlands and France elsewhere, we have seen that nationalist parties, they didn't gain as much votes as expected.
All right. Thank you so much for coming all the way here from EWTN Germany. We appreciate it so much. Robert Rauhut, Communications Director. Finally tonight, Prague is lit up with a dazzling new art installation on a Catholic church. Wow, isn't that pretty? Look at that, Robert. The Czech city's St. Ludmila Church is being used as the canvas for the Signal Light Festival. Organizers say they want to make visual art more accessible to the wider public and chose this historic church, as well as a few other buildings in Prague. And you know, we've seen the Pope do the same thing at the Vatican. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.